live for the Tanya class, part 3. In today's class, we are going to discuss a continuation of the last class where we ended off and spoke about Tzimtzum, how Hashem went from infinity to a finite world. And through this process called Tzimtzum, where Hashem concealed all of the light in order to create space for otherhood. And we discussed how Tzimtzum exists within us, how we need to remove ourselves or put ourselves aside and conceal ourselves to make space for another person. Thank you so much, everyone who's joining and in person, live, watching the recording. I'm so honored that you're with me. And to my live audience here. So today's class, we're going to be talking about what comes next. Because of Tzimtzum, because Hashem removed himself, now we have this process that the Kabbalists called Seder Hishtalshelut. Taking what God initially did was create a world from nothing to something. In Kabbalistic or Hebrew terms, this is called Yesh Me'ayin. Hashem created the world Yesh Me'ayin. It was not as people originally thought, just like creating initial train. Rather, the world was created from completely from nothing to something, and that happened in this big explosion like state called Tzimtzum, where suddenly there was a concealment, and then in this state of concealment there was something, because beforehand there was nothing. Now, once Tzimtzum happened, there's now the possibility for Seder Hishtalshelut to take place. Everything else that we're going to be discussing in all of these classes are different parts of Seder Hishtalshelut. Seder Hishtalshelut actually means Seder, like we're going to have the Seder soon on Pesach. The order, Hishtalshelut, is a chain, so the chain order of creation. So the Seder Hishtalshelut is the order-like way that the world came into being, which is a cause and effect way, world after world after world, until we got to the finite world that we live in. So to get from infinity to the finite world that we live in, there was a lot of levels and steps in creation. And we are going to cover that. And the reason we're going to cover that is because it's not just cool, even though it is really cool. By learning about it, there is two huge advantages that we gain in our lives. One is that we can transcend our finite reality and see things from a higher perspective. And that is like a type of a meditative state where we are in Zen, where whatever you call it, utopia, Zen, where suddenly you feel one with everything because you see things as they are from that higher perspective, the pre-Tzimtzum state. And understanding that helps us see the world as it truly is, in a higher light, without as many concealments. It helps us tap into a higher God consciousness. And the next stage of that is that once we get to that stage of seeing things from a higher consciousness, of seeing the intention or how the world came into being from a higher cosmic level, suddenly over there we understand then the entire purpose of why we're here. And we understand the purpose of Hashem, God creating the finite world that we live in, which is not just for finite beings to ascend, to transcend the tzimtzum, to transcend the layers of concealment that make us feel so distant, so apart, so jealous, so much hatred, and so many things that are all the free choice that we have, and all the negative things that we see in the world, and all the chaos. Not just to transcend the chaos for the purpose of elevating ourselves, but we then understand that the entire purpose or will of the world is then to take that higher reality and to bring that consciousness down back into the world that we live in, to not stay in a Zen-like utopic state, but we realize over there, and we're imbued with a sense of purpose to try and transform the day-to-day life, and to realize that God's ultimate vision and that the ultimate reason we were created was to bring that light back down here. So it's, and this in Kabbalah uses a metaphor of Jacob's ladder, that Jacob's ladder in his dream was that metaphor for a ladder that bridges the distance between heaven and earth. And that ladder is us, human beings. Every human being is that ladder that is a paradox, that we're a physical body made of the most physical finite elements of earth, air, fire, and water. At the same time, we house infinity inside each one of us. Every creation has infinity. And as a human being, we are that ladder where we can constantly, day to day, we can fluctuate from ascending to seeing things from a higher realm, going up the ladder to see things from a higher consciousness, to go beyond the tzimtzum, beyond the concealments, to have a higher perspective of the world, and then go bring that back down in the ladder. The ladder in Jacob's dream, which is in the Torah, where Jacob is leaving and fleeing from his brother, Esav wants to kill him. In that dream, he sees angels going up and going down. So we ask, what's the point of going up, down? We're living here to try and ascend, to try to go transcend the materialism of the world that we live in, to try to transcend the darkness. What is the going down, the purpose of going down? And we come to realize when we go up that ultimately the greatest thing we can do is bring that light back down here and to bring godliness into a finite world. And that is where true magic happens. So that's just a little bit of a teaser. So to do that, we're going to start learning today. Now that we understand that the first step that was needed to happen was tzimtzum. Tzimtzum meaning that concealment of God's infinite light, which we call the atzmut. the essence of godliness, where there was just God and nothing else. That first step that there needs to be is a removal of that encompassing light in order to create room for another. Now here's where the other starts to come into play. So the Kabbalists explain it like a void. They call it this place a halal, which is what we in Hebrew terms say the orb of the world, the universe, the world that we live in, the halal haolam. How do we translate halal?
The sphere is our space.
The sphere, our space.
Outer
space, the halal, right? Outer space. And in this space, we learned that there wasn't a complete void with nothing in it. After, it's a pretty good circle. There was not a complete void. That in this space there is two things that remain. We already the first thing that remained is a rishimu, and I'm going to write that for you, which is a remnant. This rishimu, what is this remnant? A residue, a residual. It's explained in Kabbalah. I have to do this. I have to get a pencil, but it's like writing something and then erasing it, and then it leaves a little bit of a residue. Do I have a pencil right here? So when you write something and you erase it, nothing of the original thing is there, but a residual, residue of the original is left there. So after the symptom, there was a residual, kind of like I think of it as the smell someone leaves when they leave the room, or the erased after you erase it. It's still kind of there, but it's not there, and it resembles something of the original. This is actually where all feminine energy comes from. All feminine energy comes from the rishimu, from that in the inherent godliness. We're talking about godliness, right? God removed the light or the revelation of all light that existed everywhere, that spilled over, that didn't allow for anyone else to exist. Just like if I take up all space, there is no more room for anyone else. Physically, if I'm taking up space, no one can enter my space. And emotionally, if I'm taking up all the space and sharing, no one else can share. And so where God was taking up all the space with his divine light and he removed it, we learned that what was left was an almost imperceptible remnant of godliness in that space. And the feminine, it derives from this rishimu. And this is a circular energy. It's an energy that is circular, it's encompassing, and it's in everything. But it takes a lot of depth to find that inherent godliness inside everything. And this rishimu is in everything, even in the most far-flung, evil human being, parasitic person. In that person, we learn, is a spark of godliness, right? Jewish or non-Jewish, everyone has a spark of God that created them, and that's that remnant of godliness, that even in the most far-flung person, there's still that spark of God. And it takes a lot of digging and it takes a lot of nurturing to find that remnant and to see that inherent godliness in every single thing. So we learn the feminine comes from this circular energy of remnant light. Now in this space, all there is now, in the beginning of the Kabbalists say, in this beginning of creation of the world, there's just this void. Now, how are we going to get to the world that we exist in? We learned that the next step was to bring back divine consciousness, to bring back divinity into this world, to create the world. And one more thing about the Rishimu is that it said that it was the remnant is letters. It's the idea of the letters, the 22 letters, which are the building blocks of creation, which are vessels. Anyways, the next step is the Kav. The Kav is where the masculine stemmed from. So really, truly, the first things that were created in our world are the concept of feminine and masculine, the energies of feminine and masculine that pervade every single creation. So first came the Rishimu, and then comes a directed energy flow of light from this outer space, which over here is flowing atzmut, or as we call it in Kabbalistic terms, atzmut, which is essence, or Ein Sof, right? Or Ein Sof, we call it, which is infinite light. So infinite light. From this becomes a directed line of energy flow. Now, this line is light in a small way, in a way that the world can contain light from godliness and have creations and have godly creations in this world, but not in a way that it will shatter the existence like it did, like it was before the world was created. Because if God brings all of his light back in, then again, it will just be godliness and no room for another creation. So it's brought down in a finite way. So Hashem's finite light is now trickling into this world in a very orderly form. And this is what Seder Hishtalshelut is. So Seder Hishtalshelut is the orderly way in which a light comes back into the world and descends into our world until we get to the finite world that we live in, which we'll put ourselves at the center of the universe, right? Because that's where we are.
Infinite light being channeled in finite.
It's infinite light being channeled in a finite way, exactly. So we actually, there's a lot to talk. This is the over here was the infinite light with the potential for the finite in it, but the infinity covered over the finite. And the example given, the example given in Kabbalah for this, make yourself comfortable, make yourself a tea. Thank you so much for coming.
It's so fun.
Welcome. So the example given in Kabbalah for the further way to understand this finite light needing to be the concealment. Well, this is really the Simpson class, but the Simpson class is the understanding that if I have it, even though there can be lots of light in here, if that candle, right, candle which is truly light, if that candle, which is finite light, right, is held near the sun, which is the metaphor for infinite light, that candle won't shine at all. It will be when it's inside the sun itself, it doesn't shine at all because it's absorbed by the infinite light. So if there were just to be infinite light, we would all be absorbed in that infinite light. And that's that feeling of being when somebody is on like psychedelics or when they're seeing as that oneness where everyone is absorbed in this oneness and there's no I am you, you am I, where do I end and where does the universe begin? That is what it would be like all the time. And there would be no identity, there would be no self, there would be no independent existences. The entire purpose of the creation of the world, Kabbalah tells us, is that God wanted to create a space where there would be independent creations that are independent of God. And to do that had to be the concealment. And now we're talking about Seder Hishtalshelut, the order of how the world came to be, the finite world. It wasn't just no world and then the world that we live in. There's a lot of steps to get to where we get to today. And those help us tap into what is the purpose of our being here? What is the purpose of our existence? Understanding that change. Okay, so that's the background. Now we said that the first step is the Rishimu, that remnant of godliness that's almost imperceptible. It's a faint hint of a trace of a smell. Then comes the Kav. Okay. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. I debated a lot on where to start because I'm like, where do we start? Do we start on Or, Ein Sof, Makif, and Kalim? I think we're going to start on the four worlds, talking about the four different realities of existence, the four-dimensional world that we live in, or the four dimensions of reality that we live in, because Passover, Pesach is coming up, and Pesach in every part of the Seder resembles this four-dimensional reality that we live in. So this idea of four dimensions is going to come up in almost every concept of Judaism, but never more so than in Passover. In Passover, we have the 4 cups of wine, which resemble literally freedom ascending the 4 dimensions of reality to the highest dimension of reality, the 4 rungs on Jacob's ladder, the 4 worlds, which we're going to talk about today. They all stem from this concept of the 4 worlds because we truly live in a 4-dimensional reality where we have 4 alternate universes happening at the same time. And at the Passover Seder, we have the 4 cups of wine where we're ascending from one reality to a higher reality to higher reality. We have the 4 suns, right, which are again mirroring that idea. And what is the fourth?
4 questions.
The 4 questions. Thank you. We have the 4 questions, which again, so we have the 4 questions, the 4 suns, and that concept is very much in that level of freedom. So in the creation of the world, we have the main building blocks of 4 are the 4 worlds and how they mirror in our soul. In our soul, we also learn is a 4-dimensional soul. We have really 4 and then a 5th infinite part of our soul. So just like in the creation of the world, we have the infinite, and then in the world, in this space where God created a vacuum for independent existence to exist, there's actually 4 realities. So we learned that as the Kav of light comes into the world, it penetrates this space where God created a vacuum, and it creates first this reality, the highest level of reality. And as it descends deeper and deeper, it creates concentric circles. And until we get to the last circle of concealment, which is the world that we live in, the world of the finite. Okay, ready for this? Okay. So we're going to go through the 4 worlds. Now, most people in the early Kabbalists thought of these 4 worlds as 4 levels of the world that we live in. So they looked at it like this. Our world is down here, right? This is the world that we live in. Above us, right, up here is the next level of existence, which is the world of angels, which is the world of Yetzirah. Above that is the next level of creation, which is the world of just souls. And above that, Tzilus is just the concept of spheros, of godly vessels of light. So they imagined it like and the way we looked at it was our world, and then above us is the world of angels. Above that is the world of souls, and above that. But we actually learned that it's not actually 4 different worlds. Not only is it just concentric, the next level, I'm like, oh, cool, it's not just 4 different layers. It's not just higher layers above. It's actually 4 layers in the same space, right? It's actually an outer world. And then as we go deeper and deeper and deeper and down, it's actually concentric circles. So some would say that Atzilos, the infinite, starts from the inside, but we would realize that outside is Or Ein Sof. Then comes Atzilos. So then comes this first world of Atzilos, which is the beginning of the concept of, having a creation. Then comes the next world, which is Bria, which I'm going to write all these down for you. Then comes Yetzirah, and then comes the world of physical action, which is the most unlimited world, which is the world that we live in the middle. But it gets even deeper than that. It gets even more cool than that, because not only is it 4 concentric circles of this space where God created this vacuum, it's actually one space that we all inhabit. And it's really, if you get to the highest level, it's actually 4 realities. We can live and exist in one space. There can be me and Moshe Rabbeinu both living, standing right near each other, and Moshe Rabbeinu is existing in that space of Atzilus, and I'm living in the space of Asiya because of my perception. So it's actually 4 different perceptions. It's like an alternate universe reality where someone is coming from a different timeline or a different universe and a different perception. He's living on the perception of Atzilus, and I'm living on the perception of Asiya. And I'm going to tell you how that is possible and what those worlds mean. And then we'll see that it's actually different layers of coverings of how much God is concealed. Because we said that God didn't actually, according to the opinion that we're following, the symptom, the concealment of God's light wasn't actually God taking away the light. It was just like this light over here, which in order for you to be able to see me, I cover it up for your benefit. And now you can see me, right? The light hasn't changed. I haven't changed the light. So we learned that if that is the case, right? And that's what we're going by, those the majority of the Kabbalists, then each world each world is comprised of how many coverings there are covering the light. So the first world, in order to get to the finite world that we live in, where we completely don't see godliness at all, from the state of all there is godliness, the first world that was created was a world where it's called Atzilus. Atzilus is the world where there was the beginning of an independent spheros existing. All of them existed. All the potential for all creations existed always. But they were all one, right? If all the candles and light are in the sun, no one exists independently. They're all consumed by the light of the sun. And Atzilus is where the beginning of spheros comes. So I would say it's the world of Sphirot, which is a whole other class. So stay tuned. Don't worry. It's the 10 different manifestations of divine light. So the 10 Sphirot really begin to exist independently. It's where independent existence begins in this outermost world of Atzilus. But this world is pretty much still the most similar to infinity, which was out over here, right? So if this world, on that world, if someone exists on that level, they basically just see God all day and they barely see otherness. They're basically just living in the reality of all I see is godliness and how things are from the highest perspective and how things look in their source, which is we're all one. There's no separation. There's no real separation. Everything is just God's world speaking us to existence. So they truly see things as they are from God's perspective. And there's no potential there for evil. There's no potential for jealousy. There's no potential. There's not even potential for any physical matter yet because there's too much light for even physical matter to exist. That is the world of Atzilus. Next world is a world where there's more covering. So in that world, there's very little coverings over the divine light. It's I didn't bring my fruit. I like to bring fruit. It's like having fruit where some fruit have different types of peels, right? Some fruits have different layers of peels. Some peels or shells conceal what's inside so much, and some shells are so thin, like the shell of a grape. I actually had a grape. Grab a grape. Grape, banana, and even nuts. So I like to think of Atzilus as a grape because the shell of the grape doesn't really conceal the grape hardly. It's the same color. It's so thin. It doesn't really hide what's underneath in the grape. Then we get to the world of Bria. We can maybe look at a banana, right? So it covers a little bit more because it's a different fabric. It's a different color. It's a different texture, but it's still pretty clear that it's a banana. So in the world of Bria, that's the next lower world. We speak of higher and lower, but truly it's a world that has a little bit more concealment. So as we go down into Bria, there's less light, more concealments. So we go into the next layer of reality that we live in, and Atzilus is the world of in our consciousness and the levels of like of the realities that we live in. Atzilus is like the realm of potential and ideas. So it's where our ideas begin to form. It's where things are just remain in their like pure idea, but we haven't formulated it. So you have like a concept of a dress because you're a designer. So you have like this idea of a dress is beginning to formulate, but it hasn't taken on even a shape or form. It's just like a flash of inspiration. That is what Atzilus is. It's the concept of ideas, but nothing is physical. There's no colors. There's no textures yet in Atzilus. In the 4-letter name of Hashem as well. All of this actually stems from Hashem's 4-letter name, Yod, Hey, Vav, and Hey. We call it Havaya because we're not supposed to pronounce the name, utter the name of God in vain or at all, actually. So this represents the Yod, which is Chachma, which is potential. So then we go down into Bria. And as we go down into Bria, there is more concealment of God. And in this level, souls begin to form. In this world is where souls begin to form. So there's a little bit more forming of differences. There's more individuality in this world, but still we're not even on angels yet. There's no personality yet. There's just individual souls beginning to separate in this plane. And this is the in our consciousness, it's the level of having an other, like getting to that level where there's an other. There's something outside of me. The concept is not just in my mind anymore. I'm able to take that concept and bring it to the stage of having otherhood. and flesh it out so that it's a full concept. I have the full picture right now in my head, but it's just a picture. It doesn't have any form yet. It's just fully able to make it out. This is called Bina, or the Hey of the Tetragrammaton of Hashem's four-letter name, right? So this is the broadening the concept, developing that concept, that initial potential, and developing it a little bit more. But we're still in mostly God. In these worlds, there's mostly just revelation and very little concealment in these worlds, even though it's very fine. Where there before the worlds were created, there was just infinity and nothing else. So compared to that, it's very finite. But compared to the reality we live in, we would think we're in heaven, right? That's where Gan Eden exists. That's where our souls go to after they pass. They'll go to those worlds. The next stage is getting one stage before the world that we live in, is where angels are formed. This world is called Yitzhak. It's the world of form. So that is really cool. That's where we can kind of talk more about. That's where to get to the idea where we talked about Plato and the Platonic concepts, and where Plato kind of his theory was that that's where truth is, because truth is how something is in its form before it takes on a materialistic, corporal, physical, skewed reality in this world. So the world of form is when something has a form, it has a shape, it has a color, it just is missing the physical part of it. But it's our feelings. It's when we have emotion and passion about things. And that is where angels come from. Angels have different missions in life. There's angels that are the angels of fear, angels of medicine, angels of health, angels of protection. There's differences in personality. There's angels of fire, angels of water, etc. So there's already personality, there's already form. There's a lot more differences there, and there's a lot more separation. In that world, I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think in that world it says it's 50-50 godliness and 50-50 concealment. So it's like a 50-50, but still there's angels who are only serving God all day. So that is the third world of, so we had, let me just do this. The first world is Atzilus, and then we have Bria, which is the idea of creation comes from Bria. Then Yetzira, which is form. So we have formation, which is also the emotional realm of where things exist on an emotional level. So it's taking that concept of how a dress would look. Then in Bria, it would be fleshed out, and it's not just a concept that I can't actually picture. I can actually picture it. Then in Yetzira, it's drawing the sketches. So you have the sketches of it, but you don't have the actual dress yet. And then we finally get down to where God's light is concealed. Hashem's infinite light is concealed so much to the point that almost none of it shines through. So it's like a dark room where this light is covered up so much, and you could just barely see enough to get through in the dark. That's the world that we live in, and that's a Siyah. And that's how we get to our finite reality. So in every world, there's just more and more coverings on this. Like, it's just like this great light, and then we just put more and more curtains on it. So depending which reality you live in, there's just more and more darkness. And then we learn that even in the world that we live in, where there's pretty much all darkness, we're like in this, like, we're just fumbling through this like dark place where nobody knows what they're here for or what they're doing. And we're just chasing like things, trying to find our way through in the dark of this life and trying to get through to the other side. And then like we have glimpses of light sometimes. That's what we're living in. But even in that reality, we have people that live in different perceptions. So even in that world that we were born into, we have people that are able to snap out of that darkness and accustom themselves to more and more light and train themselves to seeing things from a divine perspective. And they're able to, for themselves, to peel back some layers of darkness, some layers of coverings. And that's what we're here for, we learn. We're here to try our best. That Hashem created the world. God created this covering so that we can exist independently, with the purpose of ultimately bringing back the Ein Sof and the Atzmos back into the world, in the world of finitude, so that we're still independent, but we all can also bring the divinity back into this world, which that era is called the era of Messiah, Mashiach, which we learn is actually not a different reality than we live in right now. It's the same reality, but with less coverings. So we say that the Rambam actually holds that in Jewish law, that nothing different has to be, there's miracles don't really have to happen. It's just the same reality that we live in with the revelation, that we can all see things from a higher consciousness, from the perspective of how it truly is, that there really is the light here, that the light really is all of that, all existence, and that there aren't really actual coverings. They're just there to conceal to us. And if we can all peel back the layers, we'll see that truly we're all part of one creation. There'll be no competitiveness, no jealousy, no hatred. There'll be no anger or frustration, because if we can see how things are coming to us, if we can see the chain and not be covered, to see that God sends us everything that we need with his love, and every single day exactly what we need, we'll never be frustrated. We'll never feel afraid, because we'll know that Hashem is sending us every day exactly what we need. So all of the fears, all of the anxieties, all the worries, all the fumbling around in the darkness won't exist anymore. We'll be in a world of light, the same world that we live in, with just our eyes uncovered to seeing how things truly are, where things come from. And that is the ultimate, where we're trying to get back to that reality. So we learn, and it's beautiful to put it in a short phrase, we are taught that Hashem, God made the world from yesh me'ayin. He made something from nothing. He took nothingness, which nobody can replicate. Because anything that we try to create is from something. We can never take nothing, even if we take it from air. There's air. Someone fashions a beautiful, beautiful sculpture. You saw those like that crazy chocolate guy on that's making the most insane things from chocolate, right? Anything you make is from something. Only God at the initial stage can make something from absolutely nothing, and that was that initial creation. And our whole job as human beings, of bearers of light, is to take that something and turn it back into ayin. Is to Hashem made something from nothing, and we want to take that something and turn it back into nothingness. Reveal the ayin, the fact that the source, that it all comes from God. To see in the godliness inherent in everything. And that's a feminine trait, because going back now to where we said that the feminine trait is Rishimu, and where the masculine, even though it comes from the Kav, that comes from outside light, we now learn something so deep that I have learned Chassidus and Tanya for 20 years or more. And this idea of where the feminine comes from the Rishimu, and which is the circular, and the masculine comes from the arrow-like state, I only learned a couple years ago, like many years into my journey. And it's just life-changing to understand that we're all made up of masculine and feminine, that the feminine us is less about finding outer sources of light to uncover our darkness, but rather than finding the inherent light that was already there all along. And the masculine trait in us seeks to find outside light, to bring into the darkness, to look outward, to find and draw down light from above, to create light. And we see that reflected in so many of the laws for women and men, even though there's some women who are more masculine and men who are more feminine. And especially as we near the coming of Mashiach, where the masculine and feminine energies kind of like meet again, where they're separated and meet again. So we're seeing this like confusion, but more of like that unification of the masculine and feminine energy, where there's less separation and more unification. But ultimately that feminine in us is that space to where, and this, we see this the most in the creation and the conception of a child, in that the masculine is the projecting, the kav. This is like the masculine trait of God. We learned that God is masculine and feminine, and the masculine energy is drawing down and the feminine energy is receiving. And in the creation of a child, the masculine energy is drawing down, creating new life with seed, creating new seed, projecting it, like literally projecting it through all the layers it needs to get to. And the feminine energy is the Rishimu. It's finding and receiving what is given, and then cultivating that and developing that, and receiving the life force that she's given, and developing that into an actual child. Without the feminine, that potential light would just, be pointless without receiving it. So we need single. There can be no creation of a child, and there can be no creation of anything real, of anything lasting, without both the masculine and the feminine needed together. And together we learn, and this is a whole nother class, but just a teaser, together we learn that if the masculine is the arrow energy, which just shoots and draws down and seeks to conquer darkness and go out to conquer the darkness with bringing light and banishing darkness with light, and that is the arrow that goes outwards and goes inwards, right? Then the feminine energy is, rather than seeking new light in a child and saying, you can do better, let's teach you this, rather than saying, no, you already are good, you are good enough, you're pure, there's so much goodness in you, we don't need to go outward to seek more light, because there was always there to begin with, it was never concealed. And that's that feminine trait. And so when we have the circular feminine trait, and then we have the arrow, which is masculine, and we combine them, we learn that in Kabbalah, that's a spiral, and that's the ultimate state of the universe, that we're constantly spiraling together, that the masculine and feminine fuse when we can learn to fuse the two energies and not try to have one dominate the other, but rather embrace that unity of the two and reach that ultimate unity of the masculine and feminine. Then we reach a spiral where the issue with one over the other is that, this is really a whole nother class, but if we're just masculine and conquering and overpowering, then it's exhaustible. It doesn't go anywhere, and then it can't cultivate into something more. That energy source is going to be depleted, and that's that state of needing to, of that masculine feeling that we all have, or the needing to be successful, to grow, to climb the ladder. It's an arrow that wants to climb the ladder of life, to be more successful. It's the drive. So we need that drive, right? But if it's just a drive to grow, and there's never a feeling of just finding the inherent goodness that's already in my life and being satisfied, then that drive is exhausting, and it can cause us to burn out and be resentful and worse. And if there's just the feminine energy, which is complacency, which is saying, I'm good enough as I am, right? There's so much inherent goodness. I don't need to go out and do anything. My value, I see the godliness in me. I am so pure and holy. I don't need to do anything else, right? Then it leads to wasting all the gifts God gave us, because God gave us gifts to light up the world and go out and conquer darkness, because we're masculine and feminine. And if we just remain feminine, then we're like, I'm woman, I am woman, I am enough, right? And when we really tap into our femininity, that's great. But if we're only one or the other, then we can't reach the ultimate purpose of creation, which is to fuse the two. And the fusion of the two is spiraling upwards is climbing the ladder and aiming to influence and aiming to bring light to the whole world, and not being goal driven and being driven to change the world, which is an amazing thing. But that it doesn't come from, it comes from a circle, that the arrow stems from a sense of knowing that there's inherent godliness in me and in every creation, that I am inherently good, that there's good in me, and that even if there's a pause in this upward spiral, that's okay, right? I don't have to always be conquering, because sometimes I'm a moon, right? We're Jews and we're the moon, and sometimes the moon wanes and the moon waxes, and it comes from, not from a need to prove my worth, but rather a need to share the light that I have overflowing with others. So it's saying I'm so full of light that I can't just sit here and take it. I need to realize that God gave it to me for a reason, and use that to draw godliness and to make this world more a place that reflects that original image of how the world was, the original way that it is, which is that every single creation here is just a vessel of light, which we will be learning in the next classes about how every single creation is just different letters which are vessels of God's speech containing infinite light of God. And the reason that we're all different is because of the different ways that the light energy comes down and form and can create us into infinite personalities and human beings with different gifts, and no two people are the same. And we're going to learn about the vessels. We're going to learn about the light. We're going to learn about we're going to learn more about the four levels, the four worlds, but even more about how the four worlds reflect in the four levels of our soul, nefesh, ruach, neshama, and chaya, and a lot more. We're going to learn about the 10 spheros in the higher worlds and the 10 spheros as they are in us. A lot more. Stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining. Honored if you're here. Leave a comment and a hi, so I know that I'm not talking to a screen. And share it with your friends if you liked it. And if anybody ever wants to sponsor a class here, any amount is great. And then anyone you want to surprise for their birthday or dedicate in someone's honor, someone who is well, or anything it is, you can give any donation on any amount. I'll link it below, and your class will be dedicated. Thank you for joining. Can't wait to continue learning. This Tuesday night, there's going to be a live on Men Are From Matzah, Women Are From Wine. It's going to be amazing, and I'll share it over here. Oh my gosh, Lisa just started now.